You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hi, everyone. It's Kat Shamapande. On today's episode of Let's Get Surety, we're going to be getting some points and pointers for contractors and surety professionals about surviving crisis and preparing for a business downturn. Today with me, I have my co-host, Mark McCallum. Hey, Mark.
Great to be here, Kat.
It's great to have you. And our guest today is Tom Schleifer, PhD. He's the author of books like Managing the Profitable Construction Business and Construction Contractor Survival Guide, and the author of the blog letstalkbusiness.net. Hey, Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I was a contractor for most of my life. Retired young, the industry having been pretty good to me. Went back and got a PhD and became for a second career a professor at Arizona State University, primarily research professor, and went back and studied many, and if not all, of the issues that I faced as a construction contractor. I was particularly interested in the causes of business failure, which I had already written about and experienced as a contractor that finished projects for bonding companies, and carefully studied the cycles of construction and the 7 major downturns since World War II in our industry, and then a live study of the 8th one, which was the 2009 to 12 recession that we all remember suffering through. So with that, I have a model, excellent model, multiple models actually, of what takes place on the way down and the way back on these downturns, which the model is being followed right now completely.
That's great. So you're bringing to the table your background from the construction industry and then the extensive research you've done on business downturns.
Yes.
Tom.
Construction business downturns.
Construction business downturns, yes.
Yeah. Tom, I've been fortunate to follow a lot of the articles and blogs that you have written over the years, and in particular recently. And I know that you're starting to see things that alarm you. We've kind of gone from a very vibrant construction economy to now one that is facing a lot of headwinds and impediments, and in some cases, the dead stop of projects. And you started to kind of sound some concerns. Could you tell me some of the things that you are seeing and that are particularly alarming you right now?
Yeah, I'm very concerned that there was a little bit of a slow reaction by the construction industry, because this is such a strange circumstance. And initially, all I heard from contractors was, this time it's different. And that led to, we need to wait and see. If I heard wait and see once, I heard it 75 times in the first month, and began to write these crisis messages saying that if this lasts any length of time, meaning the U.S. economy downturn. Now, I don't have to tell you or your audience that the U.S. economy is basically shut down now, going on 8 weeks.
Yeah.
That's 16% of the year. The construction industry is a lag industry. It follows the U.S. economy in normal cycles by 12 to 18 months. And just because this downturn has a very unique cause, it's still a construction market downturn, and it's following already the pattern of the prior 8 since World War II. But the wait-and-see attitude seems to be pretty strong. A little bit of optimism, maybe too much optimism out of Washington, D.C. For the first month or so, that we were going to have a very fast recovery, that the stimulus funds were going to straighten all of this out, and we'd just be back up and running within a month or 2, 3 at the most, I've heard in the first couple of weeks. And now that's obviously not going to happen. And those in our industry that have waited to restructure their company, And it always means a reduction in overhead, which no one wants to do, except our overhead is 90% or greater payroll. The minor elements like rent and telephone and Federal Express are just a small percentage of our overhead. And if our market drops off 10%, 15, 20, whatever it is, we actually need to cut our overhead expenses by the same amount. That's the otherwise we go into the negative.
So, Tom, you had mentioned, I think, briefly about the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009, and you witnessed that and were a researcher in that period. What happened to companies that were complacent during that recession?
In all of the downturns, we have had a failure rate. The construction industry, unfortunately, is the second highest failure rate industry in the United States, second only to restaurants or the food business. And if we weaken in the initial part of the downturn, we don't cut soon enough, we go into the major part of the downturn financially weakened, and then the worst of it happens when the recovery comes. We don't have the capital or cash flow, and in some cases not even the borrowing capacity to handle the recovery when it comes. And that's when we see the lion's share of failures, because we're paid so slowly that we actually finance the work. And curiously enough, on the way down, because we're doing less work each month than the prior month, less work each quarter than the prior quarter, we're actually accumulating cash. Doesn't matter whether the jobs are profitable or not. We're spending less in this month than we're recovering from last month from accounts receivable. So it's a very positive cash flow in a negative circumstance. So it seems a little painless. We don't cut as much as we should. And then as soon as the recovery comes, we spend more per month than the prior month, and we have to finance that. So entering the recovery, being financially weakened, and contractors so far have gone 8 weeks, some of them without cutting their overhead, they're already spending part of their capital. It's a balance sheet issue, which your members are obviously very familiar with.
Right.
So we can't weaken the balance sheet.
You had touched earlier about whether or not a downturn would be 6 months or greater. What is the significance of the 6-month indicator or mark?
The 6 months comes from the data. We had, when I did the research, which was in the mid-90s, the initial research on the 7 major downturns prior, there were actually 11 downturns, but 4 of them were very short. For example, 9/11. 9/11, the month and 2 after 9/11, construction industry suffered a drop-off in total construction put in place. However, within 4 months, that number was recovered completely to where it was, and we went back into a growth market. In other words, the data simply showed that our industry can handle, because we're a lag industry, can handle up to 6 months of a downturn as long as it comes back, because of our long-term projects and the fact that in a short downturn, the design elements don't stop completely. So it doesn't have such a long tail. After 6 months of a U.S. economic downturn, projects in design begin to be canceled. And that lengthens the tail.
Right. In your research,
month picking 6 months, but the shorter ones simply don't have a long tail. And granted, it might cost us a few dollars, but it's not a threat of failure.
Right. So in the research, when you're looking out, are there certain things that you are particularly looking at in terms of, for example, architectural services and other things as leading indicators?
Oh, yes. And unfortunately, early on, I need to use anecdotal information, but I'm so well connected with all of the sureties, major associations, that I have access to a lot of data. In fact, it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. Data is traded to me because I come back with information they can use. And already in this current downturn, we're seeing design projects canceled. The reason it's got to be just anecdotal is none of that is published yet. And sometime in June, I'll find out how we were doing in April. And in July, how we were doing in May. In other words, there's a delay in when the information is collected.
So, in looking at the past situations where there was a downturn, you've indicated one of the critical actions that a contractor can take is to reduce overhead. What are some of the other characteristics of resilient contractors that you've seen? For example, is leadership or management of the contractor critically important during this time?
Well, leadership and management is critically important at all times. The better managed, better led construction companies make more money. We're a very unusual organization industry. From a successful contractor measured in profitability, there's a difference between the lowest profitability earned by a contractor and the world-class contractors of a factor of 3, which doesn't make any sense. Most industries, some companies are 15, 20, even 30, 40% better than another, but very few make twice the profit. In our industry, at all given times when I'm collecting data, there are profitable companies that make X, profitable companies that make 2X, and profitable companies that make 3X. Makes no sense at all other than the quality of leadership and management as a measurement.
Do you see any distinctions? And I realize that it's kind of early in this crisis, but do you see any distinctions with what is currently occurring and some of the past downturns that you previously studied? For example, I know that there was a shortage of craft workers and talent. How do you think that might play out in this crisis?
Well, the shortage has evaporated overnight, so it won't be a factor. And until we're back to the measurement of construction put in place, the measurement I use is measured by dollars. Until we're back to that, we won't have the problem, except after if we're long, we'll follow the pattern of the 2009-12 in that it was long enough that people left the industry, creating a labor shortage. That will depend on the length of this one.
Another thing I wanted to ask, I know you've been talking about some lessons from the past and past times that have caused economic downturn. This one being somewhat distinct in that it's from a pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about productivity and profit implications that are due to like new work protocols or restrictions caused by the coronavirus and on construction sites?
Well, the current restrictions are literally a nightmare in that there's going to be serious cost and productivity issues, and it's simply going to lead to disputes because the biggest question is who's going to pay for it. There's no doubt that contractors are going to do it. You have no choice. Either don't work or follow the guidelines. And both ethically and practically, our industry will respond and go back to work. It's better than not working at all. it puts people back to work, but it's going to reduce profits and unfortunately create a lot of disputes. Contractors will likely be alleging that the extra costs are not their fault, and owners can immediately respond, well, the extra costs are not our fault either.
Yeah.
Contractors will likely claim that it's a massive change in condition. That's not their problem. And the owners can easily respond back to, there's always a clause in the contract that says the contractor will operate in accordance with all codes and regulations. So it's a back and forth dispute. There's no doubt that the current work is going to suffer profitability quite seriously. I mean, 6-foot separation, checking people at the gate, larger jobs will actually have paid healthcare workers doing it. Just a whole lot of expenses we're not used to. And with the tight profit margins in our business industry, I would guess that a lot of these jobs are going to lose money, if not most of them.
I can imagine that the supply chain and procuring particular materials is going to be made that much more difficult during this time. Has that been a factor that you've seen in survival rates or failure rates of contractors?
It hasn't been a big one in the prior downturns because they followed a natural economic pattern. And when the U.S. economy recovered, the construction economy recovered, and it was smooth. And in each case, the world economy didn't necessarily collapse. It certainly weakens if the U.S. economy weakens. But in this case, we have a global problem, and supply chains are going to be affected much more quickly and in some cases more permanently. Less resilient foreign countries are going to have more difficulty surviving this than the United States, which goes into it as a wealthy and well-organized nation.
So that's really going to affect the pace of recovery.
Oh, it's definitely. We get a lot of product from out of the country, and we get a lot of equipment and elements that have some pieces made out of the country. So, if we're able to produce 90% of it, but we can't get the bolts and washers or the filters or whatever is made out of the country for that particular element, we still can't deliver it.
So, Tom, kind of switching subjects a little bit, in terms of surety professionals, what would you advise them in terms of how they can help contractors right now in addressing all that is in front of them with the crisis?
I have been convinced for a long time and widely published on the subject that sureties and surety brokers, bond brokers, can and perhaps should have a greater influence on their contractors in that just about all of the causes of contractor failure are preventable. They are contractors, in the most part, taking the wrong type of work, work in the wrong location. The biggest one, taking work way too large for them. And all of that work is bonded. In my case, I'm very familiar with brokers and sureties that have argued with their contractor that are they sure they want to take this job? It's out of their expertise. And too often the contractor wins that argument and those jobs fail or don't do as well as they should. I know contractors will scream if they hear me say it, but there are sometimes, seems to me, that the bond ought to be much harder, if not impossible, to get if the surety or broker is convinced it just is not something the contractor is equipped for.
So certainly sureties and bond producers will act as a in an advisory capacity. And in some cases, as you said, they'll have to put the brakes on, so to speak, if they believe that the contractor is overextending the company or going in a direction that their experience and resources doesn't warrant. So in effect, you see that as very beneficial during a downturn and really needed.
Absolutely. I would say that the surety and the broker are sort of a filter of the work a contractor can take, because if it's completely off the wall, they'll actually put their foot down and not do it. And the analogy I would use now is, I think we need to tighten up that filter. I think on the downturn, we have a lot of exposure, and contractors are looking for any work they can get, so they can get a little sloppy in project selection. And on the upturn, they need to be able to finance it. And in many cases, the surety and broker are better at scrutinizing whether there's enough cash flow to handle each of these new jobs, perhaps than the contractor. You can't be in the construction business unless you're optimistic. It's a tough business. We're noted for being perhaps overly optimistic, and the sureties need to dampen that down if they can, and the brokers. And I realize that they are in it to sell bonds and to assist the contractor in doing that work. The problem is that some of them on the surface are so dangerous, they're just not worth the risk. Now, obviously, the surety or the broker has to be a good salesperson to cause that to happen, because they have to overcome the contractor's optimism. So it's a delicate balance, but a better filter or a tighter filter might be advisable now. Well, will be advisable now.
Well, and it really shows the importance of those strong relationships that the producers have built with their contractor clients.
Yes, absolutely. And whenever I bring that up in discussions of with people who are not involved with the construction industry, they don't understand how it could work, because they think that each bond is a different bonding company. They don't realize that the surety relationship is a single bonding company for a single company, which is key to all of this. It's actually the best model for a working relationship.
So if you were going to provide 3 takeaway points for contractors dealing with the current situation, and 3 takeaway points for surety professionals advising those contractors, what would those be?
I guess the biggest is the wait and see is not going to work. It's already obviously going to be longer than 6 months. I mean, I don't think there's anyone out there thinks the U.S. economy is going to turn faster than 6 months. And we've pretty much agreed that the construction economy follows it. I don't see any possibility that the U.S. economy would be down for a while, but the building would come back. So if we're in it for the longer haul, the idea of not cutting overhead early on because you can afford it is sometimes a fallacy, in that you can't afford it. In other words, you can't give away what some people think is excess or reserve capital. There's no such thing, because you're going to need it in the upturn. And just following the U.S. economy, the way it's coming back, consumers make up 40%, and some stats tell us 50% of the U.S. economy. Even when we're relieved of these restrictions, social restrictions, I don't see everyone running out to spend their money. And I ask the question, how long will it take to put 30 million people back to work that are on unemployment? And are there 30 million jobs going to be back all at once? Obviously, restaurants are going to be slow. Travel, air travel particularly, is clearly going to be slow to recover. Hospitality follows both of those. So hotels, I mean, those jobs are not necessarily instantly rebounding. So caution and timing would be the two most important.
And then in terms of for surety professionals guiding those firms, again, urging the caution, giving another set of eyes and another sounding board sounds like the right things during this time.
Yes. And a very hard sell is if the market goes down, let's just pick a number out of the air, and I'm not projecting it. I'm simply using it as an example. If the market is down 20%, if every contractor in the United States, and I know it'll never happen, but if every one of them said, all right, I have to be 20% smaller, we would actually maintain a competitive balance in such a way that the possibility of maintaining profit would exist. What we do on the way down is, that's fine for everybody else to get smaller, but I'm going to get any work that I can. So I don't want to get down to 80% of the size I was. And we begin to lower the prices. In every downturn, profit evaporated from the market. The longer it went, the greater the percentage. But we put a ton of work in place in 2012, 13, and 14, of which we already have the statistics. We gave most of it away. And on the way down, we're going to do that again. If someone could convince contractors to voluntarily downsize instead of fight all the way down, it just would relieve the competitive pressure that takes the profit out of the work. And taking cheap work doesn't help. I was presenting this at a seminar in 2010 when someone stood up in the audience, a contractor, and he said, well, some contractors are agreeing with you and some aren't. He said, so if my market goes down 20%, he said, to make up for the ones that are uninformed, and he actually used the term for the crazies, he said, then I'm going to have to go even smaller. And my response to it, I delayed for effect, and I said, no, you can continue to fight for the work and lose money. Trying to make the point that, yes, you may have to go smaller because some crazies are out there fighting for every last job, cutting their costs. But it makes no sense to put work in place for a loss. So yes, the enlightened contractor in a 20% down market may have to go down 30 to protect themselves. That's a really hard sell, and I'm almost hesitant to recommend it. But it is the reality that contractors need to hear. They all hear it after the fact. I had a lot of complaints of being a pessimist and a doomsayer all through 2009 and 2010. As the downturn led into its third year, there was a lot fewer complaints. In other words, people realized, all right, we have no choice. The problem was some of them waited 2 years and then they cut overhead. The waiting is just inappropriate. And I would add at this point, no one's more sympathetic to laying off people. I was a contractor for the lion's share of my career. I know how it feels. 2 of our people have just gotten married. 2 others, their spouses are pregnant. 2 others, they're putting kids through college. I mean, our businesses are more like a family than they are a business. And we just don't have a choice. It's painful as all get out. And when I'm lecturing, I say, the only thing more painful is to have to lay them all off because your company goes bankrupt. So I'm not unsympathetic to the fact that some people will lose their jobs. But in a downturn, that is the only defense. The reason that research took 3 years instead of shorter is I kept looking for other solutions. And there simply were none. The only defense is to cut our costs, because to not creates losing projects. The project itself makes money, but the company loses money because it spends too much.
Tom, thanks so much for these perspectives. They are certainly valuable during this time. If people want to get more information, either about your books or about your blogs and articles, where should they go again?
They can contact me at letstalkbusiness.com, or any of them should feel free to email me at tom@Schleifer, SCHLEI, F as in Frank, ER.com. I'm semi-retired and happy to provide whatever input I can into the industry, because I'm afraid some of these concepts, processes, and research results are going to die with me. So I'm giving them away anytime I can.
You can also check out the NASBP blogs. Tom was so generous and shared a series of commentaries around these topics that are published through the NASBP blogs as well. So there's a lot of great places to get more information on these hard conversations and the difficult situation we find ourselves in.
Right. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks, Tom, for joining us.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.